Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Thursday. It means it's time for a new FL Basics tutorial. This one is a continuation in the series about how Harmor works. This one is all about the filters. So, this is based on data that we discussed in the first tutorial, which was about basics of additive synthesizing in general, its comparison to subtractive synthesis, and what that means in terms of Harmor. If you have not watched that, I recommend that you do, as I'm going to assume all the information I discussed in that video is common knowledge now. At least for people who are watching the series, obviously. Anywho, so we're gonna take this in like individual chunks of Harmor, like big parts, and then we'll do little stuff, and then that's what the individual tutorials are going to be. So it's probably going to take at least more than 1 week to do well. This one today is all about the filter section. Now, as a sort of example of how additive subtractive synthesis works, I actually talked about what the filter did in the first tutorial. And what I had said was that this spectral visualizer here that we see isn't the actual audio out. It's not like reading the audio output of Harmor. It's actually reading more or less the audio input, in the sense that this is the data that it played. It's data, as in it said that, okay, I want to play this harmonic, and then I'm also going to turn it off for a second and bring it back, and then turn it off for a second and then bring it back, and then steadily changing data for all these individual harmonics that added up to information corresponding to me moving the filter knob. And that's how it approximated and mimicked a low-pass filter. For all intents and purposes, it's the same thing as an audio filter, but it has interesting ramifications based on how we can control it inside Harmor. So by default, to start off, we have these two filters. By default, the first one is the only one active, and it's in serial, which means that it's actually being processed by the second filter. However, the second filter is not engaged. It's set to a custom shape, which by default is nothing. So that's what's up with that. It's also by default set up to be a low pass filter, as you saw me messing with it. And we have a bunch of options available to us that are not available to us in traditional filter setups. So let's take this from right to left. So over here we have this adapt knob and an envelope controller. This envelope controller works as you would expect. It basically influences the filter's position based on an envelope amount. And what envelope is that, you might ask? Well, if you go over here into the tabs window, we actually have a drop-down menu where the whole bunch of individual parameters. These are parameters, right? And then this drop-down menu is modifiers. It works kind of in the way that Citrus does in its layered method of controlling parameters, where you have tabs that had, all the parameters, and then you have a tab that had all the modifiers. There are a lot more parameters and a lot more modifiers in Harmor than there were in Citrus. So this is why we have drop-down menus to do this. However, you can also directly access these by interacting with the knobs. So, like, for example, if I went to the frequency knob on the cutoff, right-clicked it, and we get Edit Articulator. And then it brings me immediately to the filter 1 frequency envelope. And then this knob controls how much this envelope influences the cutoff frequency. By default, it's 100%. It's just going to do what you do. You can bring it down to 0, which is center, because this is 100% to negative 100%, which means that this will do the inverse of what you had said in the filter frequencies envelope window. If you're unfamiliar with this kind of interface, this is what is referred to as a line editor in FL. I have a tutorial in the FL Basics series on line editors. So it was a fairly recent one, so just look in the list and see which one was close. It's just called line editors in easy search. So that will teach you how to mess with these and interact with all of FL, because it's kind of based around this sort of architecture. Anywho, back to the filter. So that's what this does. And we get this adapt button, which is on by default. What this does is it changes the bandwidth, which is this jazz here. It changes that to basically sound accurate at all pitches. So, like, if I play a high note versus playing a low note, what this is doing is basically making the filter. It's kind of like keyboard tracking or note following, but what it's doing is basically changing the properties of the filter so that it sounds similar across all pitches. It's not super duper obvious with the low pass filter, but that's more or less what that does, and it is on by default, and I have more or less always kept it on, so it's pretty useful. Moving over, we have the keyboard tracking option, which, as you see here, I had it on set like here. I had a whole bunch of notes, and you can see the filter cutoff is staying right where it is. And if I hit keyboard tracking, if I middle click it or right click and hit reset, it'll bring it to 100% keyboard tracking, which means that the filter offset will basically follow the note values, so that a lower note will have a lower cutoff, and a higher note will have a higher cutoff, so that it has the exact same harmonic quantity for each note. So as we see here, we have all these harmonics. That's how many harmonics there are, and up here we have a similar number of harmonics. And that's what's up with that. That's what this does. So, but here, however, we can actually go beyond 100% to 200%, where the filter offset will be more than the note value. So the 100% follow the note value pretty identically, which meant that all future notes had the same harmonic quantity, as I said before. However, more than 100% creates a sort of exponential increase in how many harmonics there are as you go higher or lower. And of course, this is the 100% to negative 100% or 200% negative 200%. So we can do the opposite, where it'll do the inverse. Which is just damn freaky. And then, of course, we can have the exponential increase, which is actually kind of cool. So that's what that does. By default, it's at 0, which means that the cutoff will be where you put it and stay there forever. And then we have width. Now, what this does is it basically changes this isn't bandwidth, although it can be used as bandwidth. What this does is it changes the effective width of the filter shape. By default, we have a whole bunch of various filter options that are pretty common, like low pass and different types, a whole bunch of weird ones, and then of course you can make custom shapes, which I'll explain in a second. But for the low pass filter, it basically changes how sharp the curve is. So that'll affect the sharpness or the smoothness of using the low pass filter. And we'll get more into how this width works when we talk about custom shapes. Also, every time you see this sort of octave and hertz relationship, which are pretty much everywhere, this changes. Yeah, one here too. This changes the weighting of the harmonics. For a second, I'm going to show you what this means using the phaser, because it's more obvious that way. Actually, no, I'll just show you the spectral view. So by default, we get octave, and because we're outputting in hertz, because if I were to output in octave, we'd get this. But if we're viewing this in octave mode, and because we're seeing this in hertz mode, we're seeing the hertz style distribution, which means that there's space between the octaves and harmonics. There's space between the harmonics, as pretty much the same distribution as you'd see in an EQ, where the lower values have more space in between and the higher values are more dense. That's more or less what that is. However, if we go to hertz mode, because we're outputting in hertz mode and we're seeing this in hertz mode, we see even distribution of all harmonics. So if we were to play only low notes, we'd see more of a gathering near the end. So visually speaking, that's how that's arranged. But when we see this sort of weighting option anywhere else, like for example in the pitch section, we have a hertz and octave setting. If we go to octave setting, the harmonics are evenly distributed, which doesn't really sound cool. Like in terms of tonal qualities, you can make some interesting sounds with this and like effects kinds of sounds and like noise and stuff like that. But it ends up evenly distributing the harmonics across the entire spectrum, which looks weird as hell. So that's what that means pretty much everywhere, the hertz and octave weighting differences. And that's what this does here. It changes how the shape's distribution is based on is it octave, where it cuts straight through everything visually anyway. You'll see what that means later. Or hertz, where it bends to the curvature of natural weighting of spectrum stuff. And it has different applications for everything it's attached to. Yes. So moving on, we have the cutoff frequency. It's pretty straightforward. But I do want to hammer home the idea that because this is an additive process, this cutoff frequency does not know so much. It doesn't so much filter the audio as it is determining where the harmonics are being turned off or turned on based on the shape. Like so. And then now we have the center here. Now this determines what kind of serial or parallel relationship the two filters have. Now it's a little convoluted, but I believe I have seen this in the way that makes sense. So over here we see 100% parallel. Over here we have 100% serial. And then in the center we have just nothing. And that doesn't necessarily mean nothing. What this actually means is that up here it's all the first filter. And then down here is all this. Actually, here is both filters, and then here's filter 2. I think. Actually, I'm going to check. We're going to check together. We're going to go look at the... Yes, okay. Filter 2, parallel, filter 1, serial, and then more serial. If what I'm about to say doesn't make any sense, feel free to check the manual and see this graph, because I have to check this often. So basically, all the way down is filter 2, and then as we move to center, we're bringing more filter 1 in. So this is merging, right? It's actually these are actually procedural values. They're not just like filter 2 by itself, and then snap both of them, and then snap filter 1. It's fading. It's cross fading between different kinds of parallel or serial behavior. So all of it down here is all filter 2. And then halfway between them is both filters. And then as we go up, it's all filter 1. And then as we go to the right side, we're talking about serial. So over in the center, filter 1 is happening, and then also the output of the serial is happening. So that means that raw output of filter 1 is coming out, and then output of filter 2 is happening, but filter 1 is also going through filter 2. And then as we go all the way over, filter 1 is only going out of filter 2, and then filter 2 is filtering it. So yes. But check the manual, should that have been confusing to you. Moving on, we have the resonance section. So this is where we get the first taste of how additive synthesis can be fun with Harmor based on its mimicry of subtractive synthesis tropes. So what do I mean by tropes? Well, if we look at how filters tend to do their stuff, let's go to the EQ and actually make a low pass filter. And I'm gonna get steep. So we have a filter. Now, the resonance is basically, the resonance or Q value is the bandwidth of the filter type. You know, so if you make a bandpass filter, the bandwidth is that's a pretty direct comparison that makes a lot of sense. So what does that mean in terms of low pass filter? Well, that creates a peak. And that's basically the resonance peak of a low pass filter. So notice though that in a real filter, using the EQ, the real filter, a subtractive filter, we get the resonance peak, and it's more or less attached to the cutoff value of the cutoff of the low-pass filter. It's a product of the low-pass filter. That's why this happens. So what does that mean additively? Well, if we go to Harmor, I'm just peeking again. Yeah, if we go to Harmor, resonance is actually off by default, but if we turn it on, we get sort of the same behavior. Now, the resonance in the filter is basically another filter that's following the cutoff value of the main filter, the actual filter. So over here on the green side, we see that it's the filter, and then we have low pass values, which are basically different instructions that are being applied to the harmonics that are around the cutoff value of the filter. And when I say that this is actually a different kind of filter, it's because you can do some crazy stuff with this. There are different resonance shapes and whatever, but the real fun gets to be when you do custom shapes, which I will talk about later. However, you can independently mess with the resonance from like by itself, like from away from the filter's cutoff. It will follow the filter's cutoff, but you can move it around. So like you change the level, which is pretty standard. We could do that. We could do that with a real filter. We can change the width, which we could kind of do with a real filter, but not to that degree. And then we can also change the offset. We can actually change where the peak is in relation to the cutoff value. And that can be kind of cool. That's a pretty nifty sort of demonstration of how that works in terms of additive filter types and Harmor. It's not Citrus. It's Harmor. And then we have this Oscillator tab, which basically creates a self oscillation, like a self oscillator. It creates an independent oscillator where the resonance is. Now notice what this does, because in the information that we're seeing come out of Harmor, we have the harmonics that are being attenuated or increased in volume based on not only the cutoff being moved around, but where the resonance is. So like as the resonance moves through it, the harmonics get louder, and then as it moves back down, it gets quieter again basically as the filter comes around. But this oscillator is moving through all pitches, not just where the harmonics are. It's not related to the note. It's related to where the resonance is based on the filter. So that's kind of cool. And that's just kind of like a sort of separate thing. Yeah. We also have an adapt option for the bandwidth, the width, the shape width of the resonance. And it does what the adapt function does over here, only by default it's off, just because changing the width of the resonance based on pitch might not necessarily be something you want to do. And so the manual, when it described that function, always qualified that being there by saying set by ear, because its function, while being useful large, might not be what you want to go for. So set it by ear, kind of thing. So now let's talk about custom shapes. Let's do that. So if we drop down here, we have a bunch of different options. We have custom shape 1 and custom shape 2. Or if you right click it, it will immediately go to custom shape, and it will bring you the shape options. So by default, a custom shape doesn't do anything, because what this is saying is that the filter is going to be on all the time as this shape passes through the harmonics. So let's say I do this. I basically made a very wide notch filter. So we can kind of see here what's going on. Where up here, the value is max, so it's going back up. Then in the center, it's off, and then it's coming in max again. And that's going off, on, and here. Off, on. It's going off, on. That's what it's doing. It's doing both. It's doing everything imaginable. It's increasing in value as it approaches the bottom, which is what this shape is representing. So watch what happens when I change the width. It's actually changing the width of the shape. It's basically changing the area of influence of the shape. So as in the spectrum of audio, the position of the shape is determined by the cutoff frequency. And then the width determines the area of influence of the shape. So right now we can actually see that if we were to turn this shape horizontally, this area here would be basically the total influence of the shape. And now we increase the area of the total influence of the shape. Let's make this more obvious. It's pretty obvious, but I'm going to make it more obvious. Let's make something a little crazy. So now we see these 3 lines that are being created through the gaps that are here. The dark areas are the bottom position of the shape, and then the bright areas in the center are the top position. And as we change the width, this line here is the center area of the shape. So then all the information here are basically being spread away from the center area of the filter shape. So you can make some real funky things with custom filter shapes pretty simply. However, the real fun, in my opinion, is when you do this sort of thing with the resonance. See, in the filter in true subtractive fashion only takes away from the sound, but the resonance actually adds to the sound. So if I go to custom shape 2, which is nothing, and then make a custom shape in the resonance, we can actually create we can go negative, but we can also go positive, which actually might be ear-piercingly loud. Oh, look. So that right there is not something that you could do very easily with your standard subtractive filter. Not very easily. You can still kind of do that, and there are plugins like mimic that sort of stuff, like Wow Filter, but they have it. That's a lot of fun. And so then, like we discussed with what you could do with the resonance, because right now custom shape 2 of filter 1 isn't the shape, and the resonance is basically following where the cutoff is, despite the fact that the shape isn't doing anything. You can offset it, with the offset knob, but it doesn't really move it as far as you can with just the filter. You can also self-oscillate and all this good stuff, and octave and hertz will change the weighting of which the shape drawing is applied to the spectrum. But all in all, rather straightforward and awesome as hell, in my personal opinion. I believe. Oh boy, no, we didn't. Okay, so these are all the most very obvious things that you can see. Your custom shapes, your knobs, all this good stuff. But if we were to come into here, we have even more fun things we can do with the filters. So we have all the basic parameters here. Filter 1 frequency. I'm just gonna make sure we can see this. I'm pretty sure we can. Ha! Okay, I guess so. So over here we have all the ones that we were messing with. Filter 1 frequency, filter 2 frequency, filter 1 width, resonance amount, resonance width, offset, filter 1 do mix, all this good stuff. And then filter 1 envelope amount, all that nice, good stuff. Then we go way over here, we get filter masking and also resonance masking. And what is this? Well, let's go to resonance mask since we're pretty much not doing anything with the main filter. We can actually kind of say that there's already self-applied. And what this is doing is attenuating the resonance amount as it approaches this area of the spectrum. And if we move the mouse around and look up at the information window over on the upper left, which is over here for you guys, we can actually see the spectrum value as the mouse moves around. So if I were to do something like that, which is a bit more drastic, we can actually see that this is selectively telling these harmonics to ignore the filter data coming in. How neat is that? And the same thing can be done with actually the main filter. So if I were to go back to low pass, I could go into filter 1 mask and do something like that. And now this whole midsection here is just ignoring any of the data from the filters. And you can also you notice it's not just the on-off relationship. It's actually like you can cross fade in a little bit, and it's kind of nice. So that is a lot of fun stuff that you can do with filters. Yeah, that was all pretty good. So we're gonna on Saturday we'll be talking about the phaser. Also on Saturday is the next live stream. It'll be 6 p.m. EST -5 GMT. Try and account for daylight savings time because that might have happened. But I don't think I have any other announcements to make. If you have any questions about any of this, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day. And I'll see you on Saturday and Friday because I'll have another video coming up. All this good stuff because I have a schedule.